Tell us what you mean by Brexit being diluted.
Well, I have consistently argued the case for compromise and advocated, and I recognise it's necessary. But what I was saying in my article this morning was that, if you go too far with compromise, eventually you get to the point where we wouldn't genuinely be leaving the European Union and we wouldn't be respecting the result of the referendum.
And you're concerned that's the direction we're heading in now?
I'm concerned, and in particular, I think we must retain the right to diverge from EU laws. One of the key points of leaving the European Union is to ensure that we can once again make our own laws in our own parliament and not be subject to laws made by people we don't elect and we can't remove.
So what has suddenly made you so concerned that that's the direction in which we're heading? Is it the Chancellor saying that there will only be very modest changes from the situation at the moment, or is it something that's happening behind the scenes?
I think it's a combination of things. I think in part it's, the government faces a difficult challenge sort of convincing people on the Leave side of the debate, because so many times in the past there have been Prime Ministers who went off to Brussels saying, it's all going to be fine, we'll sort it out, we'll bring you back a deal you like. And then, at the last minute, there's been, territory has been given away. We have made compromises. I accept the need for that. But I think there is only so far you can go before ultimately you find yourself in a position where you're diluting Brexit so much that it isn't leaving the European Union in a real sense.
And so when you hear Philip Hammond saying that there will only be very modest changes to our relationship with the EU once we've left, you think he is actually reflecting government policy there? I mean, it was interesting. Downing Street tried to refute what he was saying, but all they actually said was you can't call leaving the single market and the customs union a very modest change. They didn't say that we would be diverging much from their rules and regulations. And you're anxious, are you, that right at the very top they're worried about keeping fairly close alignment with the EU?
The Prime Minister set out a bold, positive vision for Brexit in her Lancaster House speech. My article today is about appealing to the government, all of them, to stick to that vision and implement it so that, once we leave the European Union, we're back in control of our laws, our money and our borders.
But as you say, the Prime Minister has set this out in Lancaster House in a speech in Florence. Why do you think that she would be backsliding from that? I mean, what makes you think that anything has changed since she set out those policies?
I absolutely don't think she wants to backslide. I think what is happening, that she is under huge sustained pressure from a range of quarters to reverse the result of the referendum. So in part, what I'm trying to do is to re-emphasise the positive case for Brexit and re-emphasise that whilst there are those who want to soften things up and frustrate the implementation of the referendum, there are others who are enthusiastic about going ahead and implementing that vision in the Lancaster House speech.
But who are those people you think want to frustrate it? You must be worried that they're right inside the cabinet. If you, who've previously been very loyal on this, feel motivated to come out and write a newspaper article about this, you must be worried that it's right at the top of government that there are people who would want to frustrate Brexit.
I don't believe that. I think the Cabinet is united in wanting to do this. There is obviously...
Really? After the different views we heard this week?
This is an issue which has divided the country, it's divided all political parties. There are differences of emphasis. The key battle now is what is going to be the end state that we ask for in our negotiations. We must be asking for an end state which is based on the Lancaster House speech, which means retaining control of making our own laws in our own parliament, because that is how we become genuinely an independent country again and respect the result of the referendum. So
do you think the Chancellor was actually contravening stated government policy when he said there'd only be very modest changes? Was he out of line?
I wouldn't make sort of too much of that one comment. That comment is not what has prompted my concerns today. What I want to do is to ensure the case for a real Brexit is made. I fully acknowledge the technical scale of the exercise of withdrawing from the European Union, as Raphael was saying, it is very complicated, and that is one of the reasons why I've advocated and supported compromise. But there is only so far you can go with compromise without ultimately finding yourself in a position where you are selling out on the people who voted to leave.
Now, the next phase of the talks will be about the transition period or the implementation period before we get to the final future relationship with the EU. And we learned a little bit more about the government's approach to that this week as well. David Davis, in his speech, made it sound very much as though there will be almost no changes to free movement of people whatsoever during that 2-year transition phase. Does that concern you? I mean, that seems to be an actual change in government policy.
For me, the important issue is what happens at the end of the transition period. Now,
so you're relaxed about 2 years of transition, which look almost identical to staying in the EU?
I accept that that looks like what's going to happen, and indeed I think there is a case for a transition period. I think my worry now is if we go into that transition period without, the clearest possible understanding of what the arrangements are when we leave. So I believe that we must have as much detail as possible in relation to our agreement with the European Union that we reach before that transition period starts. If we go into it not knowing what the end state is, that is something that would worry me.
And when it comes to the end state, what are the things you absolutely could not sign up to? If there was continuing European Court of Justice involvement in trade disputes, for instance, or what's been described as easy movement of people in and out of the UK, would that lead you to a point where it was a Brexit deal you simply couldn't agree to? Well,
I think the key issues here are the end state must allow the United Kingdom to run its own trade policy and to make its own decisions on its laws and regulations.
And so no involvement from the European Court of Justice at that point?
Well, there is the government has agreed a very limited role for the European Court of Justice, a time-limited one in relation to EU nationals. I don't see that as a big problem, but any enlargement of that role I would see as very worrying.
And do you think there's any possibility you could end up voting against this deal in Parliament?
Well, I'm not going to start making predictions about how I would vote on a deal which hasn't even been agreed yet. What I want to do is to make sure that we work together to try and bridge divisions, to come up with an agreement with the European Union which gives us a new partnership with them, which hopefully a majority can be comfortable whichever way they voted in June 2016.
Theresa Villiers, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.